Well, good afternoon, coasters. Hey, it's Bruce Smith here. Now, not much of a day out there, so I thought I'd put pen to paper and try and set out the path that this government is taking us on. If you're happy with it, that's okay, that's fine. But if you're not, how do you push back to ensure that a fundamental change to the philosophy that we as coasters and Kiwis have followed for years, which resulted in a population that was adaptable with a can-do attitude that all of us mostly possess, trying to ensure it's not changed to one of reliance where the state provides for every aspect of our lives and the can-do disappears. A bit dramatic, you might say? Well, DHBs have gone, politics now centrally controlled, Three Waters about to go, a move to change local government, that means your local representation, to ensure that greater control is by government over fewer councils. The land grab undercover, where legislation is being used to attack the final frontier, and that's private property rights. So, a land grab, the final attack where private property rights are the final frontier. How will this be achieved? Well, it'll be achieved using notified resource consents. You watch this space. You look out there 5 years, and I'll guarantee you'll see the same as me. What is a notified resource consent? When a resource consent application is notified, other people will have an opportunity to have their say on your project, on your land. It also means that processing timeframes will be longer and the costs will be much, much higher. When public classifications are involved, they ensure that any person or organisation anywhere in New Zealand can make it a submission for consideration. So out come the forest and birds, out come the federated mining clubs, out come every Tom, Dick and Harry who wants to have a say about your land. Now let me tell you, the most important thing as we go forward is going to be who sits around your council tables. Balance is great, and a focus on the basic requirements set out in the Local Government Act is even more important. When you sit around the table as a mayor, chair or councillor, your prime obligation legally is to act in the interests of your residents and ratepayers. Like I said, when you sit around the table as a mayor, a chair or a councillor, your legal obligation is to act in the best interests of your residents and ratepayers. You've got no choice. That's what you're there for. Using your position to act in the interests of central government at the expense of your residents and ratepayers breaks every rule in the book. Now let's talk stewardship land. And I'll start with the land statistics for stewardship land on the coast. It's our most critical process, as none of this land is rated, and it places an unfair burden on existing ratepayers. In Westland, 13% of the land is rated to pay the costs of 100% of the land. And by that I mean, if you want infrastructure right across your territory, your region or your district, someone's got to pay for it. Well, in this case in Westland, 13% of the land is rated and they pay for the costs of 100%. It's fundamentally unfair to the extreme. We look at the actual figures because they're really interesting. I love figures and I don't know what it is. The West Coast is 84.23% dock controlled. That's a total land area of 2.335 million hectares, and dock control 1.964 million hectares. We move to stewardship land, and the West Coast average, or the West Coast total, is 33.99% of every hectare of land is stewardship land. That's 792,689 hectares. It's a lot of land, out of a total of 2.335 million hectares. In the Buller District, only 10.62% of the land is stewardship land. It's the smallest by far of the West Coast, on the West Coast. So Buller's total area is 795,569 hectares, and it's got 84,482 hectares of stewardship land. So pretty small overall. The Grey District, however, totally different. Its total area is 351,705 hectares, and stewardship land is 41.4% of every hectare of land in the Grey District. That's 145,624 hectares of stewardship land. Massive. Then we move into Western District, where 47.33% of every hectare of land is stewardship land. We have 1,188,520 hectares of land in Westland, and of that 562,582 hectares stewardship land. Quite massive, isn't it? Turn now to the latest announcement from government. And the announcement was headed up, Government Speeds Up Stewardship Land Reclassification. And it was from the Honourable Dr. Shia Varel, Acting Minister of Conservation, just a few days ago. She said, the government is accelerating the reclassification of stewardship land to ensure land with high conservation value is protected for future generations to enjoy. It's vital that land with high conservation value is classified correctly to ensure that it's protected for its natural and cultural heritage and safeguarded for the future. Reclassification fits with the government's manifesto and its commitment to protect, preserve and restore our natural heritage and biodiversity, and it's one of the Department of Conservation's core roles and responsibility. However, the current process of reclassifying stewardship land is complex, it's costly, it's time-consuming. The government intends to progress legislation to streamline, speed up and simplify the process so land with conservation value is identified and managed appropriately, while land with low or no conservation values can be considered for other uses. It will also allow for more effective public consultation. Further Cabinet decisions regarding the proposed legislation will be made later this year. Here's the crunch. In the meantime, 2 independent expert national panels are being established, with their initial focus being on the Northern South Island and the West Coast. They comprise independent representatives, including technical experts with capability in ecology, earth science, landscape, recreation, heritage, Maori, and the panels have been tasked with providing revised classification recommendations to the Conservation Minister. There will be opportunities for the public, stakeholders and iwi Maori to provide feedback on the recommendations through a public consultation process prior to the final decisions being made on the proposed reclassification. Goes on. At this stage, it's anticipated it will take about 8 months for each panel to undertake their work and provide recommendations. Further details on public consultation will be announced in due course. There is considerable confusion over stewardship land status and ongoing debate whether it is appropriate to allow economic activity in these areas. These new measures will remove ambiguity and provide clarity as to what conservation values are present and how much protection the land has. She then goes on, today's announcement recognises that many stewardship areas across New Zealand are home to threatened species and high priority ecosystems. Reclassification will ensure appropriate protection of these areas, which is critical to reversing the decline of Indigenous biodiversity. It will also protect the cultural, historic and recreational values of stewardship land for future generations. Then we move to the panels. The first panel focused on the Northern South Island. It's got two alternative chairs. One's Christopher Finlayson and the other the Honourable Philip Wollaston. Both good guys. The members, Mr. Jeff Canham, Ms. Di Lucas, Ms. Laura Cole McLaughlin, she's on West Coast Regional Council, lives in the Bulla, Ms. Mary O'Keefe, the Honourable Mita Hurunui, and Mr. William Shaw. The second panel, which is our panel, focuses on the West Coast. The chairperson, Dr. Jan Wright, former Commissioner for the Environment. The members, Mr. Philip Blakely, Mr. Neil Clifton, Dr. William, it's Bill Lee, he's a former Bulla Holdings director, Dr. Les Malloy, Dr. Marima Muralanning, and Ms. Catherine Watson. So it's interesting because there's a few people missing out of there. The biggest area of stewardship land are held in Westland and Grey districts. The big thing that's missing is iwi. They're not to be seen anywhere. There's no one from Westland and there's no one from Grey. I don't know how that's going to go down. So let's discuss the makeup of the panels. The political nature of the two panels is a real concern to me. It's a real concern. There's no iwi representation at all. The Treaty of Waitangi made it quite clear that the exercise of chieftainship over their lands, village and all treasured things was given to Maori. It's also given and part of our basic laws as Kiwis. You know, as a Kiwi, you're entitled to exclusive and undisturbed possession of your lands and estates, forests, fisheries, and other properties. It's quite frustrating. So all treasured things covers such a range of things like Punamu. Do you know that all of the Punamu on the west coast is in stewardship land? In the mineral fields with gold, tungsten, ilmenite, food, water, where the guardianship is so important. And it's involved in every part of the stewardship land being reviewed. But there's no iwi. Now this is where the politics has come into it. We have MP Damien O'Connor playing politics as he plays his Westport card, again to boost political support in the Bulla. You look at the area of land in Westland, 47.33% of every hectare of land in Westland is stewardship land. That's a total of 562,582 hectares, and Westland has no representation. commercially, local government-wise, or iwi-wise. Grey District Council, just as bad, 41.41% of every hectare of land in the Grey District, and that's 145,624 hectares, and they have no representation. And no iwi representation. We look at the panel and we go, well, Buller District Council owned Buller Holdings. Former director, Dr. William Lee, has been appointed to the panel. And on the Northern South Island panel, Laura Cole McLaughlin, a West Coast Regional Councillor from Westport, and she's a daughter of Jan Cole, who's the current Buller Holdings Director. She was also one of the West Coast Regional councillors that tried to remove Chairman Alan Birchfield from the role of chairman, and she's been appointed. Challenger Stuart Challenger, excuse the pun, was quoted in the Grey Star as saying Birchfield had to go due to his position on climate change and SNAs. What's going on? What's this all about? So we go to the Buller Stewardship land. It only covers 10.62% of the land area in the Buller, and it's only 84,482 hectares. It's called politics, and I'm not fussed on it. We're still on stewardship land. What does Eugenie Sage have to say about it? Because she's got something to say about most things. She says, the Greens are pleased to see more progress on reclassifying stewardship land, but we urge the government and the two regional panels to make sure conservation principles, iwi, Maori, and the public interest are at the heart of decision making. The purpose of the review must be to identify areas which deserve stronger legal protection, such as national park or scenic reserve status, to better protect their natural, cultural, historic or recreation values for the future. That quote was from Green Party spokesman for Conservation, Eugenie Sage. I thought, well, that's pretty good. That's what she's saying. She's on side with iwi. She wants them to be part of it. What do iwi say? And we referred the Green Party statement to iwi. Her statement, conservation principles, iwi, Maori, and the public interest are at the heart of decision making. Now, Tirunanga o Ngāi Tahu is extremely concerned by the Crown's latest stewardship land announcement, and they say it's a clear breach of the treaty partnership. Iwi say this reclassification process took place without our involvement. As treaty partners, this is unacceptable. A large proportion of land in the Ngāi Tahu Takuwai is conservation land, and any proposals to reclassify that land are of the utmost significance to Ngāi Tahu. Of course it is. It's where all the punamu, it's where all the food chains, it's where all the water is. As a treaty partner, we should have been closely involved in the development of these proposals from the outset. That has not been the case. Ngāi Tahu has been substantially excluded from the process after a limited engagement some 2 years ago, in which a wholly different panel model was discussed. This falls well short of what is required in a treaty partnership under Section 4 of the Conservation Act and the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi and under the Ngāi Tahu Treaty Settlement. On being advised of this announcement, shortly before it was released publicly, we attempted to engage with the Minister's Office on our concerns and find a way forward, but a constructive response was not received. Ngāi Tahu have said, as a result of this, we have filed urgent legal proceedings to prevent any further steps being taken in relation to this matter. Let me tell you, iwi will have the full support of most, if not all, of the coast councils on this challenge. Stewardship land. What was the intention? The intention was clearly expressed by the Director General of Lands, PHC, Bing Lucas, in a memo to the State Services Commission in December 1985. So after that, stewardship land was given statutory recognition in the Conservation Act 1987, essentially as the conservation land that remained outside of the various specific categories of protected land. The ability to classify land as stewardship area was an essential tool during the process of land allocation. The logic was really simple. There was land which officials agreed, and the minister accepted, already used for productive purposes, and was of little or no conservation value. So it was allocated to the appropriate SOE, like timberlands, NZ Rail or whatever. Then there was land that was already protected as reserve or had high conservation values, which had been assessed and were already documented. This land was allocated to DOC, and if not already done, gazetted with the appropriate category of reserve or specially protected areas. And then there were large areas of land, some considered to have significant conservation value, but the values of which had not yet been analysed or documented, and with the scientific rigour necessary to support a reserve classification or some other form of statutory protection, i.e. at that stage wasn't up to scratch. This category was allocated to DOC to be held in stewardship. The individual parcels, over 3,000 of them, became stewardship areas under the Conservation Act. However, it was never intended that land thus designated would remain so permanently. So now, after 33 years of no action, the assessment of stewardship land is about to begin, and any assessment will be invalid if the classifications are made without a balanced evaluation panel. Community, conservation, mining, industry, farming should make up the panel. But most importantly, iwi. Where are the iwi? We go out of our way to try and adhere to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. When government sets a course like this, it drops the ball and it's a problem. As we continue talking about stewardship land, you can't talk stewardship land without talking Treaty of Waitangi, which joined Maori and Pākehā in a partnership. Was it 1875? Something like that. It's important to remember that Ngāi Tahu have never claimed for ownership of the water, but they have an active claim seeking guardianship. And any reasonable person who wandered around the South Island, especially in Canterbury, South Canterbury, would not claim that the waterways have been well looked after. You couldn't possibly do that. And I keep getting referred to me Article 2 of the treaty. And it's an obligation for both the Crown and for Maori. This is a partnership. The interpretation in Maori says confirmed and guaranteed the chief's te tino rangatiratanga, i.e. the exercise of chieftainship over their lands, villages, and taonga katoa, all treasured things. Maori agreed to give the Crown a right to deal with them over land transactions. So they had full control over their lands, and they had full control over all their treasured things, things like punamu, water, healthy waterways, the right to find food, all basic things. In English, which I can handle much better than Maori, it confirmed and guaranteed to the chiefs exclusive and undisturbed possession of their lands and estates, forests, fisheries, and other properties. The Crown also sought an exclusive right to deal with Maori over land transactions. We move on to SNAs. SNAs are building up to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's about private property rights, guaranteed to Maori under Schedule 2 of the Treaty of Waitangi, and this same right extends to all of us. And it's always been the rule of law. In the treaty, it's a partnership, and it guarantees land ownership rights to both parties. Contrary to what you may hear, councils do not by law currently have to identify SNAs. The law requires them to protect SNAs, and how they do that is up to them. Identification and mapping are one option, and one option only. Supporting community initiatives is another option. Hurunui's done that. Hutt City's done that. However, watch the new law in July as it proposes that it become mandatory for councils to survey, identify and protect SNAs. The new law also proposes identification requirements for highly mobile fauna, taonga, etc. Identification which itself does not achieve protection. Under the current law, the Hurunui District Council in 2016 removed all of its mapped SNAs from its district plan. There were no appeals, and this decision is now legal. All SNA sites in Hurunui are gone. Watch this space in July. What I need to tell you is if you give access to a council employee or council contractor to assess your land for SNA purposes, you reduce your ability to protect your legal rights as a landowner. Don't give access until you understand the implications. Now we move on, talking about resource consents, publicly notified resource consents. Let me tell you what's in the pipeline. And keep in mind, all of your mayors are involved. All of your councillors are involved. And none of these things can happen unless they vote for it. We're evaluating sites of significance to Maori. We're now going through the investigation and planning process. We're investigating natural hazards identification. We're now going through the planning process. So if a natural hazard is identified, and it might be a hill that could come down every 28,000 years, it's going to be important for you to be involved. We're investigating outstanding natural landscapes. We're now going through the plan process. You may have seen what's happened in Northland, where 44% of the land has been declared an outstanding natural landscape. You can imagine what's going to happen on the coast. We're looking at outstanding natural features, and these are now going through the planning process. And if there's an outstanding natural feature, you'll be required, whether you're the landowner or not, to get a resource consent, and we'll finish off with that one. We're investigating outstanding natural character. Not really sure what that means. We're going through the planning process. So if there's something on your property that you own freehold and it's got an outstanding natural character, you will be required to get a publicly notified resource consent. If your land gets designated under any of these categories, and you can add to that wetlands and SNAs, you will need a notified resource consent to make changes and improvements to your land. Now, when a resource consent application is notified, other people around New Zealand will have the opportunity to put in a submission, have their say on your project. It will mean that processing timeframes will be longer and the costs will be astronomical. They'll prevent most people from doing anything. When public classifications are involved, they ensure that any person or organisation anywhere in New Zealand can make a public submission. Now, if you overlay all of those various classifications that I've just been talking about, put them on a map on the West Coast, and then you turn around and you need a publicly notified consent for anything that's done, you will have Forest and Bird, New Zealand Mountain Clubs, every Tom, Dick and Harry will be there, and they will finally get to close the coast down. It's wrong, but there is a way forward, and it sits around your representation. You fill your council up with yes sir, no guts people, you're going to get the result that we don't want. Anyway, catch you later.